Welcome everyone to Transgender and Non-Binary Awareness Panel discussion this evening. My name is Krista Danis, and I'm the Events and Program Coordinator here at the Aurora Public Library District. Thank you to everyone for tuning in from home via Zoom or Facebook Live. And thank you to the Aurora Human Relations Commission, whose mission and values align with ours at the library to make this a natural and amazing partnership, for which I am so grateful. Also, a big thank you to our guest this evening. Before I hand it over to Ryan to talk a little bit about the Aurora Human Relations Commission, I would like to mention that a few housekeeping things. So we do have closed captioning available this evening. If you want to see it and you currently do not, you can head on over to the live transcript button at the bottom of your screen, and you can click Show Subtitles. And if you are seeing them and you don't want to, then you can click Hide Subtitles. Also, please keep in mind that there will be time for questions and answers at the end of our session discussion today. So please pop your questions into the Q&A function of Zoom or into the comment section if you're on Facebook, or you can even email me the questions and I'll be looking at my email, monitoring that. And that is kdanis@aurorapubliclibrary.org. Okay, so finally, you will notice that the chat and video are disabled. So this is a webinar, so you can just sit back, kick back, relax, and enjoy our very informative and important program this evening. So with that, I will hand it over to Ryan to talk a little bit about the Aurora Human Relations Commission. Hi, Ryan.
Hello, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Fine, thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Ryan Maley. I am a member of the Human Relations Commission of the City of Aurora. And we are an organization that seeks to further understanding within our community and to preserve the recognized rights of residents of the city and anyone who really interacts within the community, particularly in the areas of equal employment, housing, and access to public services and facilities. If you feel that you have been the victim of discrimination, the Commission is a local resource for you. You can learn more about how we can help and submit a complaint through our website. We will post a link to that in the chat. If you are a member of a local community group addressing issues related to our own work, we'd welcome an opportunity to meet with you and discuss how we might help. Please contact us to discuss how we might work with you or your group on projects or special events like this one. This presentation is actually part of our Fairness and Equality for a Better Aurora series of events. Past events have included discussions about housing during the pandemic, about LGBTQ+ friendly business practices, and other topics. And we have more events coming up through the rest of the year. We'll tell you about some of those at the end of our session. Lastly, to just learn more generally about the Commission or to keep informed about upcoming events, please follow us on Facebook. And of course, feel free to reach out anytime you think we can help. With that, I'll turn it back to Krista. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Ryan. And then I think I'm gonna pass it on over to Bertha to introduce our moderator and our wonderful panelists this evening. Hi, Bertha.
Hey, hi, Krista, thanks. Good evening, welcome, and thanks to all of you for joining us tonight. My name is Bertha Bailey. I am a commissioner on the Aurora Human Relations Commission and a member of the LGBTQ+ focus group. On behalf of the Human Relations Commission, I would like to thank our panelists for their time, interest, and participation in this evening's program. Let me introduce you to them. Isabelle, where are you?
Hello.
There you are. Hi, Isabelle. This is Isabelle Peckham. She is 21 years old, identifies as trans woman, and is currently studying computer science at NIU. She is involved with the Youth Outlook organization as a youth leader at one of their trans and drop-in centers. In her free time, Isabelle enjoys singing and playing guitar, as well as learning more about this often confusing world we live in. Welcome. Jameson. Hello, Jameson. How are you? This is Jameson Pagano, and he has been working in the field of mental health services for 23 years. He specializes in working with LGBTQ+ adolescents, young adults, and adults. His primary focus is working with those who identify as trans or are questioning their gender identity and their families. As someone who openly identifies as trans, Jameson values the importance of transparency and makes an effort to be visible whenever possible for those who are unable to be visible for themselves. Jameson frequently shares his personal insights and professional expertise through speaking at LGBTQ+ community events and meetings. He currently resides in Bolingbrook with his family and is actively involved in his church. Keith and Shelley, hello.
Hello.
Hi, this is Keith Sternad, he, him, his, is father and Shelley Sternad, she, her, hers, who is stepmom to Milo, he, him, they, who is in college and identifies as trans male. Keith teaches hard of hearing junior high students, and Shelley teaches hard of hearing elementary age students. They received much support from PFLAG when Milo first came out. The Aurora chapter of PFLAG allowed them a safe place to navigate the unknown and to ask all the questions they needed to have answered. Our moderator tonight, hello Penelope.
Hi.
Moderator tonight is Penelope Torres, who is also a member of the Aurora Human Relations Commission and is also on the LGBTQ+ focus group. Thank you, Penelope, and it's all yours.
Thank you, Bertha. Very much appreciate that introduction of all of our panelists as well. Once again, my name is Penelope Torres, she, her, hers pronouns, thank you. I am a Latina and also a very proud and out transgender woman. In addition to that, I am also a person of indigenous ancestry, specifically the Borican Taino down in Puerto Rico. Kind of reconnecting with that is kind of a great way to kind of think about the way that gender norms have gotten kind of changed. And I'll touch on that in a little bit as well when it comes down to kind of our non-binary cousins that we're going to touch about with tonight as well. Thank you everybody who's actually coming in and joining us today. We're going to have this discussion about the transgender and non-binary experience and hopefully give some information and open up some eyes and maybe kind of give a direction for some people that are looking for resources or just were kind of curious on how they can be a better ally, or for those who are looking for more information when it comes down to their own personal journeys. So kind of talking about that, as I said, I identify with she, hers pronouns. I'm sure many of you are actually saying that. Many of us have our pronouns on here and actually were introduced with that. When we're talking about transgender and non-binary identities, pronouns are so incredibly crucial to validating the individual. Now, when we kind of get into that, pronouns can take a lot of different shapes and a lot of different forms and a lot of different variations, as it were. In that aspect, I was actually going to see Jameson, if I could start with you and Jameson, I'm sorry. And if I could actually start with you and kind of get your viewpoints on the importance of pronouns and really what that kind of means to people that are starting to embrace their trans identity.
Well, I think it's the easiest way to start experimenting with how you express yourself and how others see you. Before you go through a name change, before you go through anything else, I think trying on different pronouns is usually the easiest way. And it's a very simple way. I mean, it's a very simple way for us to introduce ourselves. And it should become very secondary in nature, especially at this point. It's very validating, especially for the younger generation. And even if the older generation has a harder time with it, it really isn't that big of a deal for us to put pronouns in our bios or to just introduce ourselves, say, hi, my name is Jameson. I use he, him pronouns. It's very benign and non-threatening. So I think it's very
important. Thank you. Absolutely. I mean, that's definitely one of those things where it's that first step for an individual when just kind of connecting to your own personal journey, which is, really empowering for the self. Now, Isabelle, I was wondering if maybe I could actually get a little bit of a viewpoint from you on kind of how embracing your pronouns has helped you on your journey.
Yeah, one of the first things that I actually started messing around with when I started thinking, oh, hey, I might be trans, or there's at least something going up with my gender, was trying out different pronouns in spaces around friends, in spaces that I was comfortable doing it. Just starting off, at first, I was using they, them around certain groups. And as I sort of moved into an understanding of my identity as a woman, started to use she, her. Anything else that you want me to add?
Unless you have anything else. I mean, and we can always circle back to it as well, too.
Sorry, I just want to make sure that I answered your little question.
You're good. There's no right or wrong here. So all is good with that. Now, Keith and Shelley, you're parents of a trans male identified individual. When they began their journey, what was it like for you to actually kind of get used to that pronouns, and how did Milo end up kind of approaching you with that?
Well, that's an interesting story. The short story is we found out a week before Milo went away to college as a freshman. So it was not something that we worked through together. It was something that I had to work through, and Shelley had to work through, and then Milo worked through at college, where Milo's had an amazing amount of support. I must say, I'm very proud of the support system he has. He goes to Carthage in Kenosha, and really has had an amazing time there and lots of support. I got a message on my cell phone, and it was a voicemail from a number I didn't recognize, saying that before Milo goes away to school, he wants to make sure that everybody's on the same page. And I thought it was a wrong number because I didn't know a Milo, and I didn't have a he going away to school. And it was I was taken aback by it. I really didn't expect that. And so I called back and I left a message saying, I'm sorry, you must have the wrong number. You probably meant it for somebody else, but just want to let you know you got the wrong number. I got another call and another message saying, no, you are Keith. You teach deaf and hard of hearing kids. You live in Oswego, but then just listed a bunch of things. Okay, yeah, all right, Milo. So, figured out pretty quickly then who it was, because I only had one kid going to be going away to school. At that point, we set up an appointment to go meet with the counselor. I was very, very lucky in that I had friends. I had a college roommate who had a trans child 3 years prior to Milo coming out. And I had kind of watched them from a distance and seen all the struggles they went through. And then when I had, this news dropped upon us, and it was very shocking. They were the first people I called because I needed help. I needed some direction. I'm very much a ducks in a row kind of person, and all of the ducks were at a rave somewhere out of state. They were not available for comment. So I really felt like I floundered for a long time. They pointed us to PFLAG. I ended up calling the number at the top of the screen. I left a message, and not very long after that, somebody called me back, talked me off the ledge. And PFLAG was instrumental in helping us navigate this whole process. And it was a process. And I would say Milo and I have a much better dialogue these days than we did before, which is kind of astonishing to me, because I thought we were doing pretty well, but clearly I wasn't. So, and then Shelley has been a staunch supporter of Milo through thick and thin through all of this, and with me too. And the summer after Milo came out, we were in the Aurora Pride Parade carrying the PFLAG banner. So I felt like I had always told Milo that I love you no matter what. And I felt that my unconditional love was kind of staring me in the face. Are you going to walk the walk? And so we literally walked the walk. It's the same. And Milo fully agrees with this statement. I have the same weirdo kid I had before Milo came out. Milo is just the same quirky, funny kid I've always known. I just call him Milo now.
Is there anything you'd like to add, Shel?
Sorry.
I would say that in the beginning there was a struggle in remembering. We had nicknames for the kids when they were growing up, and at first it was like we used to call the kids like Megalator. It's Megan, but Megalator. So then I had to learn, Milolator. I was changing like the names, and then there were times it was he, she, he, and he's so patient with us in the beginning. So it was like remembering and struggling, and learning and incredible. He's just an incredible kid. And yeah, I mean,
Well, it's wonderful that like Milo has parents that have embraced him and have embraced his pronouns so fully. That's definitely just a wonderful, wonderful environment to be in with that. Now, we are also talking a bit about the non-binary experience. Myself, like I said, I do have some Indigenous ancestry with that. And when it comes down to gender and gender fluidity, there's definitely a lot more Western ideals of binary. And we do have a lot of our shared cousins here that identify as non-binary and prefer pronouns of like, the singular they, which I know is kind of a change with a lot of vernacular for some people. Another thing is two spirits with many Indigenous nations. Not all identify with that concept because once again, that kind of does sometimes lean to a gender binary. And many people are fluid with that. So kind of thinking about the non-binary experience and how we can support, our brethren, our cousin with that. Jameson, what would you think is probably the one thing that you could really, really emphasize to people when it comes down to embracing non-binary identities?
I mean, I feel like that it's a movement away from, I'm a Gen Xer, right? So it's a movement away from boxes and things in black and white. And that I think that in many things, we have to start looking at things as on a spectrum. And, the binary is either end of this and non-binary is somewhere in the middle. And I really do believe that most of us, it's very hard to find people who, just like on the Kinsey scale, identify on the 0 or on the 10, right? I mean, usually you fall somewhere on the scale. And so the biggest thing that I have heard within working with families and with clients over the years who come out as non-binary, it is always the singular they, them. It's and the one thing that I always tell them is it is even just harder for me too. Right? It's just a language change, but you have to try. I think that's the biggest thing that is important in being supportive is I know that it's a change, but change is hard and but it can be an exciting adventure too. So it's you just have to, as long as you're trying and making an effort, I think that's the best thing that you can do to be supportive, especially of kids. I think that's a very natural thing to come out probably first as non-binary or kind of exploring. I think Isabelle, you said that with exploring with they them kind of first before you kind of so
well, transition is definitely a journey. And one of the things that many of us kind of maybe put to the side necessarily is that our transitions and our coming out experiences aren't necessarily just our own. We do share those with the people around us. We share those with our family members. And one thing that I always discuss with whenever I'm talking to individuals about the trans and non-binary experience is that transition is not a singular and solo process. There's your support systems, there's people around you, your friends, your family that all transition with you when it comes down to that. And part of that is, either overcoming obstacles or having people actually help and embrace that as well. So kind of thinking about that in a little bit, I'm going to pick on Isabelle a little bit here. Thinking about your coming out experience and what that was like in your transition, both personally and also like in your support system around that. How was that experience for you?
I think that it went pretty well overall. The thing is that when you're coming out, you don't just come out once, or very few people end up just coming out once. I came out to some friends and I came out to my parents and I ended up eventually coming out to the world at large. And each of those were sort of taken at their own rates and at their own times. So when I was just very vague, okay, maybe there is something going on with my gender identity. I was fortunate enough to have some friends who were transgender, who I knew before I started thinking about this stuff for myself. Talking to them about this sort of these feelings that I had, and talking to that sort of like helped to lay the groundwork for how I can talk to my parents about these issues. And eventually, when I graduated from high school, I was fortunate enough to have them call my name when I was graduating.
Oh, wonderful.
And that's sort of how I came out with, to the people who were looking for me, came out with a bang. For everyone who wasn't, not noticed, because it's graduation.
Might as well make an impact, right? Well, awesome. Thank you for sharing that. From kind of a parental standpoint, Keith and Shelley, you kind of shared a little bit of your journey with Milo. As far as like the family transition, what can you say as a parent, with a transitioning child? What do you think that would be like, the biggest point that you can end up trying to emphasize, in that point of the family transition?
I think the biggest point of family transition is it's not your life. It wasn't my life. Milo wasn't trying to change me. It wasn't trying to change Shelley. Milo was trying to get me to accept who Milo was. And as a parent, I grieved. I grieved for a long time. It was very upsetting. But I like to gather information before I move forward in any direction for anything. I reached out to friends. I reached out to PFLAG. And then Milo was an introvert. Milo would be king of the introverts, but that requires more effort. Milo is the ultimate introvert. And so Milo was never going to be in the position to come out publicly to our family. It was not going to happen. And Shelley and I were married to other people before. We have a combined family, mixed family. What's the word?
Blended.
Blended. I knew. We have a blended family. And, I know that Milo came out to his cousins his age first, and to our children also. And everybody Milo's age, and Milo is 21, and so the age is right around that, had no issues whatsoever. They were just like, okay, you're Milo. Moved on. And it was very it's definitely harder, I think, on the older people, the Gen X people who have the boxes and in the black and white. I am very much in that mindset, and I very much fight it. And there's a lot of information to take on. And it's just, I guess I know that when I was making my own decisions when I was 21, I would guess, if I could ask my parents, were they 100% behind every decision I made? I would guess they would say no, but they never let me know that. And, they supported me through some pretty sketchy things, and not that what Milo is choosing to do is sketchy in any way, shape, or form. It's just way different from anything we know and are familiar with and are comfortable with. And it's way outside our comfort zone. And every time we take another step outside of that comfort zone, we get more comfortable with the whole, trans and LGBTQ, all of that. Milo lives with a group, fortunately, with a group of 3 other friends, 2 gay identifying men, one, his roommate, sorry, Milo, is female and has gone, identifying as an ace, saying just wasn't attracted to males or females, was just kind of right down the middle. It was a term I was introduced to, so I was like, okay, fine. And so, it's just a whole different world, and it's, you have to get used to the, like the colors. I see, the flag there behind Isabelle, and Milo's got the same flag. Milo also has a pan flag. And, and I'm a teacher. Shelley's a teacher. I teach junior high deaf and hard of hearing kids. And there was a pride club at my junior high, and I asked to become involved with it. So I've become one of the co-sponsors of that program. I have all these mini flags in my room, and I have like a set of 5 LGBT, pan, trans flags, just kind of mixed right there in the middle of everything else. It's just there. And, right in the middle of it, it says, be proud of who you are. Because I know a lot of these students just don't have the support. And I see how much they're hurting. And I'll never, ever get out of being a pride sponsor because of that. because a lot of those kids don't feel like they have anybody they can talk to. And for a lot of those meetings, the adults, we just kind of sit back and the kids go around and do their thing and figure things out together. Man, I know I went off the rails with your question. At least once.
I think we did on that. Shelley,
Yeah.
how was the family transition for you?
I think the thing that stands out the most for me is Milo had some trouble emotionally junior and senior year, and we really didn't know what was going on. And I think once everything happened, like he was saying, the week before he went away for college, and then it was like click, 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 you know, like, oh, okay. And for me, it was like almost like a big relief, like, okay, now we know what's going on. You know, like now it explains the past year and a half. Like, I know we don't fully understand what's going on right yet, but okay, now we know what we're dealing with. Like before it was like, still, we just didn't know like what was causing the depression, what was causing this, what was causing that. But then it was like, okay, now we know. So at least I felt like we were headed in a direction. I didn't know what the direction was, but at least we had information.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
And
so
that's, I mean,
felt
yeah.
so I think that's what stands, that's what stands out to me the most.
And then just to piggyback off something I said before, Milo was never going to announce coming out. And my friends, Steve and Raina from Wisconsin, they were the ones who really held my hand through this. And they said, it is not cool to out your kid. Don't do it.
Very true. Absolutely. And I mean,
but it wasn't
for
something
multiple reasons.
And I didn't understand it at first, but the more I got into it, I'm like, oh, I get it now. So then, but knowing Milo was such an introvert, I just asked Milo, like, did you want me to tell the family? Because I'm not sure, you know, if you're going to tell one person at a time, we're all going to be very old by the time everybody knows. And so Milo gave me permission to like write a letter, post a letter out on Facebook and email a letter to people who weren't online that way. And it was a letter that I stole from my friend Steve and Raina, and I had adjusted it as needed, but they told me that they had stolen it from somebody else and adjusted it for their needs. So we had that blessing and we took it and we ran with it. And since then, I've had people ask me about it. And I've said, yeah, of course you can use it. You know, it wasn't mine to start with. And from that, we had nothing but positive responses.
Right.
And, you know, positive comments and just lots of positive vibes from it.
And people asking, like, they're experiencing it, so then they're asking us, like, okay, now we know you've been through it, so now can you help us?
And
who may have never said anything before that.
Right. I've had people come up to me that I would have never expected to come up to me. I also play hockey in my free time, and I had somebody, after most of the locker room had cleared out, he's like, hey, you know, you had something about Milo, and can I ask you about that? Because my nephew, blah, blah, blah. And I'm, sure, no problem. And I never, ever would have had that connection. Not a chance. So
sometimes being visible, being vocal, and being supportive is, you know, the best thing to be there, not only for yourself and your child, but, you know, for others that you may know as well. And thank you for that perspective.
And, you know, and as far as like being positive or people being negative, at least I feel like the negative people chose to say nothing, which I appreciate. You know, I didn't want to get in any type of war. I didn't want to get into, I mean, I'm going to protect my kid. Let's understand that. But I was glad that the people who were supportive, and the people who weren't didn't say anything negative. So I'm taking that as, at least for them, progress, because it could have been a lot worse if it was 20, 30 years ago when I was a teenager.
Yeah.
There's definitely movement with that. So Jameson, kind of thinking about the family transition and everything else, we have a child that has transitioned. We have parents that have had a child that has transitioned. You yourself identify as a trans male and have transitioned and are a parent. So how has that been for you?
You know, I I was lucky because I think Keith had said it earlier. It's the adults who have the harder time. You know, my kids were pretty young when they transitioned. My twins were 3 and my oldest was 6. So they were really flexible with it. Actually, the book that was the most helpful was Red, A Crayon Story. The amazing book. They know it by heart, but that was very helpful in explaining what transitioning is. It's about, you know, a crayon that is blue in color but has a red label, and you know, no matter what you try to do, you can't make that color red. And so sometimes the label is just wrong. So my kids were the best about it. But I do think that being a parent also gives me that perspective of when I'm working with families. I do understand kind of the loss and the grieving that the families sometimes do go through in transitioning. I mean, that is a real thing, and not that the person who is transitioning needs to necessarily be the one to hold space for their parents going through that, but that it is important to at least acknowledge that is, for a lot of parents, it is a loss. You know, we carefully name our kids. We do come from a time where we did. I mean, we're just now starting to recognize, hey, maybe we shouldn't be celebrating gender, you know, before babies are even born, right? Trying to get away from gender reveal parties and things like that. You know, so that it's a newer thing where we really did celebrate, and really, I mean, even in my own experience as a parent, we did the same thing. So, you know, I think that times are changing, right? It can be a lot for some people to deal with, but you know, just acknowledging that sometimes it is that loss. And I stand behind that. I feel like sometimes the older we are, that when we transition, you know, that sometimes there are more losses. It's harder to, you know, when you live in an entire adult life as one person, or in one, that the world sees you in one way, that sometimes people have a harder time with seeing that change, and have a harder time accepting it. And so the whole reason why we allow kids to transition, you know, even medically before they're 18, is because we see that the younger that they are, it helps save their lives. You know, what's going on right now across the country and is repulsive and disgusting, in the attack on trans kids. And you know, it is, to me, it's child abuse. You know, that these parents who have been supportive, and providers who have been caring for them, it does save kids' lives by allowing them to transition at a time where they're also transitioning with, you know, their peers are also going through normal, just regular identity, you know, adolescent stuff. A lot of times it is a normal stage of development. So anyway, you know, I got off tangent too, but
well, no, I mean, and it's all very relevant. I mean, I myself was an adult transitioner. I didn't come out until my adult years, you know, and
transformed. That's what I call us.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what it was. And you know, I'm a millennial, but I'm an elder millennial, I guess you could say. And so, you know, I grew up in like the 80s and the 90s, and originally in Ohio, in kind of a conservative family, because you know, I am of Latino descent, and you know, culturally speaking, it is very binary when it comes down to that. And I know, you know, I knew that I had to hold, you know, space for my parent, you know, because at the same time, I know that there was that time that was needed to kind of mourn the space of the idea of the identity. And one thing that I think at least I've noticed is that I've become much closer with my mother, that, you know, since this, because, you know, you're not keeping and holding all that space and energy of being closeted, because it's a lot of space to end up occupying, you know, in there. And the way that I personally helped bridge that gap is, you know, I reached out, and we, you know, in person, this is pre-COVID, you know, and all that stuff, this is years ago. But, you know, we reached out, we kind of like explored what was happening, but I also invited her. I'm like, well, you know, I've made the choice on my identity for my first name. However, would you like to choose, you know, my new middle name, you know, and kind of as a way to bring in the family element again, and, you know, try to bring that ties in. And, you know, both her and my grandmother embraced that, actually. And so like my little abuelita, she's passed now, bless her heart, but, you know, I feel like she's always with me. They were part of that renaming, and it became something where, yeah, personally, we did have to have a little space to kind of mourn that identity, but out of that, together as a family, we were able to create a new one. And I think that's invaluable personally when it comes down to that.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So
I agree with that. Yeah. And that duality of you can have both things. You can mourn that while still celebrating, the creation of the authentic person and that is peaceful and happy and living their true life. So
absolutely. Everything that I've always heard from everybody that has given me feedback about my personal transition, they're like, it's you, but it's you, but plus, it's like the better version of you. And I'm like, I like that. Let's stay with that version. Okay.
Yeah.
Then that kind of brings me to the next thing I wanted to talk about is, we have our own personal journeys of the coming out. We have our family journeys of coming out, which, is a group transition. And then, finally, we do have that larger social transition when it comes down to where we've actually opened up to maybe our closest networks. And now it comes to that time to really step out into the world and kind of declare who we are. And I'm going to pick on Isabelle just for a sec here, because you had a wonderful story that you touched on there where you kind of declared it at graduation. So is that where you kind of mark your personal social transition milestone?
Yeah. I, like a lot of people, decided to say, oh yeah, I'm trans at that time, because it's, no matter what, a big transition moment in someone's life. It's sort of, in a way, starting again as one page of your life closes and another opens, either way. Mm-hmm. And sort of having that opportunity to come out then, when I know that things are going to be changing a lot. And I need to accept that no matter if I came out or not. Because transitioning is a big change that affects how the world sees you. It affects how people interact with you, for better or for worse.
Absolutely. And so kind of thinking about somebody who is looking at that social milestone, what would be, from your perspective, Isabelle, the one thing that you would like to instill on that person that's, maybe a little tentative, they're getting to that point, they know it's coming up, they can't really hold it back, what would you like to tell them?
This is actually something that I've been thinking a little bit about recently, because someone that I know recently came out to her fiance, which is a big thing. And just knowing that it's like, need to words. Just
there are no wrong words.
True. And actually, to be honest, kind of that, thinking about it, that there are no wrong words. There's no wrong ways to come out. There's no wrong way to be yourself in this world, so long as you're being yourself. And even if working towards that can be rocky, it's still, I think, something worth doing.
Absolutely. I love that. And I mean, that's because it comes down to, there's no wrong way to be you. Like, as long as you're being authentic to yourself, you need to be true to that. Thank you. I appreciate that. Jameson, what do you think about when it comes down to that social transition, thinking about that next step that a person that is transitioning needs to take? And what do you think would be something that you would like to pass on to them and kind of emphasize when they're about to get to that next step?
And they're about ready to get out and going out in the first time, that it's going to be terrifying and you're going to be really scared to do it. But that first time is the hardest. The first time that you go out, it's terrifying, but it's also exhilarating too. Because most people are super scared the first time they do it. They don't know how people are going to react. A lot of the trans young women that I've worked with, and like, go try out, walking around in Walmart with a purse or something, kind of, it's pretty benign, but it is terrifying. And there is the reality that we see, that we do feel like we're a vulnerable population. But I think once you get out that first time, the more you do it, the more comfortable you feel. And I think we can all of us who have gone through that, we can all attest that one day you'll look back at those times of when you were first going out there and you'll be like, wow, I can't believe that I was that terrified, or I cared that much what other people thought. Because eventually you start to not really care what other people and how other people feel, because living your truth is way more freeing than any opinion of strangers or people you may encounter in the world.
Absolutely. I completely agree with that. I remember, when I first started coming out and, I had literally no clothing of my own. I was coming out with a, borrowed dress and whatever else, and just dipping my toe into that world. And, it's definitely one of those experiences that you have to jump in. But once you're in it, you're like, okay, you know what, this is me and everything else. Kind of, because I want to make sure that we have time for our Q&As as well. Keith and Shelley, on that social aspect, we kind of touched on it a little bit. What would you be able to say as like that one point of advice to kind of, give parents to trans children that are, just starting to get into that social transition phase?
Well, I know that Milo really, really enjoys it when somebody recognizes him as a male.
I was going to say the same thing. It's the gender affirmation for Milo. We've gone to a country market, I guess.
Oh, farmer's market. Yeah.
Sorry, words again. At a farmer's market, and I had taken a Milo with me, and I had gotten my lawnmower blade. I dropped them off. There's this little old couple that comes there, and I dropped off the blades, and next week we went back to pick them up, and the older gentleman called Milo young man, and Milo was on cloud nine.
Yes.
Oh, I'm sure.
For hours. And he's like, you don't know what it means to get your gender affirmed. And I'm like, I know, but I'm happy you're happy. But yeah, Milo was just over the moon over that. And again, it's, as a cisgendered male, that's something that part of me doesn't 100% understand, but I understand that that's how Milo feels about Milo. Mm-hmm. So I don't want to, I've had enough things projected onto me. I don't want to project them onto Milo at the same time.
And a little bit back to the family part of it. Our children, my daughter's 20, and my stepson, Keith's son, is almost 19. But I mean, they were very accepting. They're of that generation. They were like, yeah, no problem. But when my daughter bought Milo a birthday card this year, and it was to my brother. I mean, Milo floated around the house.
Yeah.
And he just walked around the house with this card against his chest and he couldn't have been happier. And just that gender, and just from family too. And we buy son cards and brother card, and just to have those simple little things like that.
Yeah, that goes a long way.
It goes a long way. Yeah.
Absolutely. Like, gender affirmation is a huge thing. Thank you for sharing that. I appreciate it. Thank you all for actually sharing that. And I'd actually like to invite Krista back briefly, so we could actually touch on a bit of a Q&A to see if we've got any questions that came through. And
hi.
Hello.
I have to make myself visible. There we go.
You are visible. We see you.
Yes. So thank you so much, everyone. This was such a great discussion. You all are very courageous, and I really appreciate the conversation. Penelope, you're a fantastic moderator. I'll be calling you for other events.
Anytime. I say stuff and things, whatever.
Okay, so we do have a few questions in the Q&A here in Zoom.
Wonderful.
First of all, the first one is, so in the beginning, it might have been you, Penelope, that kind of mentioned that non-binary, or maybe it was Jameson, non-binary as being part of a transition. In your experience, do some stay with that identity as non-binary, or do most often they sort of, it is truly a transition piece?
Oh, James actually talked to that a little bit, because I believe he was the one who kind of touched on how many people actually kind of have that non-binary expression as kind of like a touchstone in the way to finding their identity. So, Jameson, would you like to elaborate?
Yeah, I mean, and that isn't everyone's experience. I want to say that, every person's experience is unique. So if I understand what the person is asking, I think what they're asking is does that person stay identifying non-binary over time, or if asking if they eventually end up identifying as trans or is saying, no, I'm not really non-binary. And I think that goes back to the black and white thinking of that people are going to go back to, that this is some kind of norm, that we have to be within the binary, as opposed to it's part of their journey. So if they're experiencing, if they say that they're non-binary, I don't really think that even if the kid is, let's say it's a kid and they're young, if they're saying that they're non-binary, just means that they aren't really identifying with either. I don't really think it's a bad thing to question. And that's kind of how we learn. That's how we figure out, and we can really figure out who we are and who we aren't, is by questioning and kind of going through those things. So I think that's what that person was asking, if I was reading it correctly. So
yeah. Isabelle or Keith or Shelley, would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, I would. Because I touched on for a bit earlier in my transition using they, them pronouns, which I think may have been part of what prompted the question. Most people, in my experience, I don't have the numbers in front of me, who identify as non-binary end up sticking with that. And one thing about the word transition, I think, that is a bit of a problem is it ends up framing it as just like a single monolithic process of going from this to this, where in most people's experiences, to my knowledge, it's very much a journey going through different things. So there's plenty of people who identify as binary who go through a period where they identify as non-binary. And there's plenty of non-binary people who conversely identify as binary early on, whatever is easiest for them to sort of help understand where they are at that moment. And regardless of if it's just a thing that they're going through in that moment, you need to make sure to respect that moment.
Right. Great. Thank you.
I think that transition for a lot of people implies that there's a starting point and an end point. And, I don't think that there's necessarily an end point. I think that it's like an ongoing process. I think maybe just the word itself, transition, it's a mostly correct word. But I think it implies that there's a point where there's a finality to it. And I'm not exactly 100% sure that there is. I know with Milo, I think there's some fluidity there. And Milo, when I brought that up, Milo just kind of gave me a little smirk like, oh, you actually are reading and figuring things out, aren't you? That's good. So, that's what I think. I mean, and I have just a very limited, it's just been 2 years with Milo. It's a very limited slice of life that we've had. Milo has not rejected his past, which, I appreciate. And we moved from one house to another, and I had asked Milo, because we had all these pictures of the kids growing up. And I'm like, do you not want me to put the pictures up of you when you were Megan? And he's like, nope, that's who I was. That's fine. You can put up whatever pictures you want. So, that was great to get that kind of, I think that still speaks to the transition, because that's, transition is change, and Milo was Megan and is changing to Milo, or is changed to Milo. I think that it's just the idea that there's a finality to it. I'm not sure that there is.
Right. It's not linear like that necessarily.
And I'm very linear. I'm truly trying to not.
Okay, well, it looks like we have a few more questions. And I think that this next one that maybe Ryan could help with, the question is, does Aurora's Municipal Code Chapter 22 Human Rights Ordinance prohibit discrimination based on gender identity? And if so, would the ordinance apply to religious workplaces? Asking regarding my rights as an employee to transition in my workplace. And that's a quote of the question. Ryan, thoughts?
So the answer is yes. Gender identity is actually mentioned twice in the ordinance, both under protections based on gender and sexual orientation. Specifically, gender is defined meaning a person's actual or perceived sex, and includes a person's gender identity, appearance, or behavior, whether or not that gender identity, appearance, or behavior is different from that traditionally associated with the person's sex at birth. When the ordinance was rewritten a few years ago, we were very mindful of the latest practices on that, and we think it's a pretty good definition. So gender identity is a protected class under ordinance. The ordinance does not exempt religious organizations from any discriminatory practices. So then keep in mind there's two parts to discrimination. One is whether someone is in a protected class, for instance, if related to gender or gender identity. And the second, what that discriminatory practice is. Usually in terms of employment, that means something like firing someone because their membership in a protected class, denying them a promotion, not paying them equally, things like that. So the bottom line of the question is, yes, gender identity is protected. Religious organizations are not exempt, and we can help if there's an issue.
Wonderful. That's so great. That was a great answer. Thank you so much, Ryan. Okay. If nobody else has any thoughts on that one, we can move on to what advice would you give a mental health professional who is supporting someone transitioning?
So I'm like, maybe Jameson, you're muted. There we go.
Sorry. Yeah, as to say, get training or get support from, educate yourself as much as possible on what it is to be working with someone who's trans. And if it is beyond your realm of expertise, then to refer out. So it is, I think it's important to have that support, but that sometimes people aren't really sure, and they do feel, depending on the person's age or whatever, making sure that you are competent in working with that person as a therapist. So regarding like resources, there's a lot of resources out there. PFLAG is of course a great resource, and it's always a place that I will send parents. I highly recommend and support it. My website, mypartnersinpride.com, has a whole list of resources that was actually put together by some other people, part of Will County Pride Coalition. They had put together some of the resources, and we also use some of their resources along with some of our own. I will say that this area has a large network of resources available, and does have a lot of support for the community, both the youth and upwards, with Youth Outlook and 360 Youth Services in Naperville. So there's things very close by to help support.
All right, great. Thank you. I'm frantically trying to type these links into the chat.
You're awesome. Thank you.
You're good.
All right. So next question, I think actually is a good follow-up to that one. Listing some resources to educate people. Okay, so we are going to have also a slide at the end of this presentation that has all of these links and a book list as well, created by the Aurora Public Library. So those will be shared, as well as the links that are in the chat and on Facebook. And then, okay, next question. If I am unsure of a person's gender identity or how they would like to be addressed, if I introduce myself with my pronouns, is that respectful? Or am I accidentally outing them, embarrassing them by calling attention to it?
I don't think
Whoever
so.
wants to go.
I think we need to normalize using pronouns. Honestly, I think that's the best thing most people will say that's the best thing that we can do, allies can do, especially as it is more risky for us, right? Like we put ourselves out there, but we all of us who are identifying as under the trans and non-binary umbrella, we have their pronouns because we know that it's important to be visible. And so I think that the more the allies do it, the more that it's normalized, the better it is for everyone. So I think it's good to get in the practice of just doing it in general, of making it normal. Going back to the very beginning of the conversation that Penelope was asking about with the importance of pronouns, normalize it.
Absolutely. And just to kind of like tag on that, I know like this is pre-lockdown, I had started a new workplace, and it was absolutely wonderful. They were absolutely accepting. And one of the things that I found that was really great was that I had individuals coming up to me, cisgender themselves, are saying, oh, I'm so-and-so, she, hers, I'm so-and-so, he, him, and whatnot, just like as a cultural embrace of that. And, you know, it really does come down to many of the workplaces because it is a cultural shift. And, you know, I work in the arts and stuff, so that tends to be a little bit more progressive in some ways. But, you know, it's really nice because it does kind of create a small safe space even there, you know, just know it's like, okay, this is something that is on top of mind for some people.
And being kind of new to the party, how we are with Milo, I think Milo would be over the moon to have somebody ask, you know, or introduce themselves with their pronouns. And I think if I did it to somebody and they weren't going to be identifying that way, they would look at me like, why are you telling me your pronouns? But it would almost be like a secret handshake to somebody who is experimenting with pronouns at least, or changing the pronouns that they would have used growing up. And so in a way it opens the door, I think. So everybody that I know would be appreciative of it. I know it's gotta be, you know, just scary, beyond scary. But I know just from our child, Milo would be appreciative if somebody did that.
I think that in addition to having it in in-person conversations, one thing that I know that I do and many other people do, including some people that I know are here today, including pronouns in stuff like email signatures and things like that. So then there's, again, just that normalization of that sort of interaction.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And I know that me including that in emails between me and professors has actually caused some of my now former professors to start including their pronouns in emails. I think that, you know, little things that people do can really start to make a difference in normalizing things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I slipped mine in there because I realized I forgot. So sorry about that. Okay, but that's a great conversation. There's another question that's kind of similar, but I want to kind of give it, make sure I get it voiced in case there's other thoughts. So this person says, being a person of color, people will ask me where I'm from, and I have to choose if or how I want to answer because it requires me to decide how much about myself I want to reveal to the person asking. How do you navigate that situation as it applies to being trans and possibly having your gender identity questioned, like in a critical way, or if it doesn't feel safe or comfortable?
I'll kind of touch on that a little bit as, you know, technically POC on a few levels here. When it comes down to a lot of our spaces, when it comes to basically, whether it be if you identify as African-American, Black, you know, Latino, Latina, you know, whatever that comes down to it, each does kind of have certain cultural boundaries that are kind of built into it and ingrained. So part of that is actually just understanding what's kind of happening around you and what possibly might happening with that. So, you know, knowing that, you have to kind of like think about, it's like, all right, well, you know, where's a good place where I could actually start safely? And how can I kind of get into this? And where's a good safe space for me within our own identity? Because like, you know, within Latin culture, it's very binary. And, you know, that was part of the colonization. And myself, I've been putting in a lot of work to actually remove a lot of those colonized things because I am of indigenous ancestry. And we didn't have the Western ideas of a binary gender. And so even culturally speaking, if we look back, you know, just past the few like relatively recent, like 100 years, you know, in POC's culture, you know, the binary was imposed on us. It wasn't something that had existed previously, really. And so even gender and sexuality, when it comes down to many of these cultures, weren't a thing. And so a lot of these ideas and concepts are relatively new when it comes to those. And so kind of thinking about, and how can you relate to that, you know, into your own personal cultural identity is really key. They just said POC in general, so I don't know. I don't think they said specifically where in that, but I think that touched on that, if that makes sense. I don't know. Did I cover that? It was a long question. So
I think so. Yeah, it was. And I think you did. Anyone else have any thoughts on that didn't get a chance? Okay, well, I have a question. How can the community organizations, perhaps such as the library, as an example, better support the needs of people, of trans people and non-binary people?
Visibility. Be visible, be vocal, be an ally however you can. That's at least from my perspective. If you model a culture of openness and acceptedness, then that's really kind of where you can kind of start in a community, and then you can give resources and say, you know, here's how you could actually tap into that. That's my brief part.
I think it's super important to have safe spaces. You know, I mean, that's a kind of the motto of my company is a safe space for all. And it's a safe place for all. And growing up, the library was a very safe space for me. I grew up in Tinley Park, so going to Tinley Park Library, which is now, I think it's a funeral home now. But it was actually a very safe space growing up. I loved reading, and I think that I mean, what better way to, I know I live here in Bolingbrook now, and I love the library here. It's an amazing library, and they put out, Pride books and all of that, during Pride Month, and I think that is the best place to have resources available that, and to include people as part of, the community. So I think Aurora does a great job of.
Well, thank you.
I have a question.
Sure.
So my question is, obviously, Jameson, Penelope, you're out in the workforce, and Isabelle, you are either in the workforce, as soon will be looking for a permanent job, and Milo will be in the future as well. So my question is, in terms of a community, of businesses that you will be looking at to employ you, what is it that community, the business community, can do to support the trans community, and what do you look for in making a decision about that? Because I think that community needs to be aware and sensitive to the trans community in the workplace.
I'll go quickly first. When I was, kind of coming out and in the workforce and kind of debating about it, really it came down to, did this company or organization have a previous reputation of being an ally? Are they supportive? Like, are they open about that? Is this something where, they vocalize their support in the community, and not, the anti-support of it, if that makes sense. And just knowing that, you have employers that are open to it, whether that be something small as in email correspondence, having pronouns on a recruiter's, email tag, that helps a lot, because that's just a small little thing to help indicate that maybe this place is going to be a little bit more opening, a little bit more accepting, a little bit more safe, than a place that may not. And it's just whatever small actions you can take individually, that they go a long way.
I think that people in the community too, we have a tendency to look for some of those signs as being a safe space, right? That if there's very little things that employers can do. I have the luxury of being my own boss, so I don't have to worry at this stage of my career about working for someone else. But when working with clients who are often applying for jobs, it's expensive to get your name changed, and while there's great help and organizations available to helping people get their names changed in Illinois, it's still a process. And so that is something that not everyone has the ability to be able to get their name changed. And so explaining to people, when you're applying for your job, why, and having a workspace where they will allow you to use your name and not necessarily your legal name, and they'll respect that and they'll support you as a safe space. People will find out very quickly. There is sometimes an advantage of kind of knowing right out of the gate, is this going to be a supportive environment for me or not? Because if it's not, there is no point in even trying to make it work. And employers they just need to get more training and education on being competent in supporting. There's lots of ways to be able to get that support.
Okay, so we do have one more question that came through the Q&A, and then I'll just read a little positive feedback we received, and then we can wrap it up if there are no more questions. But do you have any suggestions how a cis parent can open dialogue with their child about gender identity and about gender identity if you suspect your child is struggling? Any suggestions for parents in that situation?
Well, I'd like to defer and answer last because we're so new to it. You know, and the biggest advice I got was you can't out your friends or you can't out your kids. So, but if you suspect your child, I mean, I know that Jameson and Penelope and Isabelle can answer this way better than either of us. I guess if you have a track record of being open-minded, if you've got a track record of being supportive and you walk the walk, then maybe it'll be a little bit easier for you to, for your child to be more trusting that you won't completely freak out with the news. You know, it wasn't easy. It was not an easy transition for either of us, but we jumped into the deep end of the pool and we got as involved as we could, as quickly as we could, because we needed the support for us as badly as we needed to support Milo. And that's how we got into it.
I had a friend at work come to me and because he suspected that his child was questioning. And because we had gone through this, he came to me and was asking like, what should I do? What do I say? And so we had a lot of conversations about what we had been through. And I think my advice would be, you trust your gut. And if there's little signs there or things that you think are making you wonder, don't come right out and say, are you, start pointing fingers and things like that, but just have a conversation. But I think the back to the comment about safe spaces, your child is listening and looking to see if it's trust, if they can trust you. And you may not think about the little things that you say or the things that you read or the things that you watch on TV or any of those little things. Those things may be telling them whether or not it's a safe space, and just to be mindful of those. So, yeah.
I think that's actually really good to kind of touch on. I won't get into too many specifics, but I had a dear friend of mine that I've known since childhood who now is a mother herself. And, she has seen my entire journey and everything else. And she has always dedicated herself to creating a very open dialogue family home life, and to ensure that they know that, like, regardless, they're loved and accepted. It doesn't matter. And they recently had a child who is now getting about school age, which is one of those times that it kind of starts hitting, that is starting to question. And for them, since they had already been fostering this loving environment of openness and just, hey, we love you, we accept you regardless, say whatever, it became almost a non-thing for the child to come out because they just kind of said, hey, Ma, by the way, I like this and I kind of feel this way. And they got to that point because they had fostered, regardless, not even knowing before, like they, when they had their child, they didn't know that they were going to possibly identify that, but they just ensured that they knew that they were in a home that was loving and accepting and open. And, now they got to the point where their child is comfortable of just saying, this is how I'm feeling and this is what's coming out. And, to me, it was actually very moving because you have a school-age child who is now coming out because they feel safe, because they feel loved, versus a lot of people in my generation and younger, we had to kind of build up a lot more barriers because just socially in general, the world was a little bit more hostile then. And so just knowing that home is safe goes a long way.
And if I could just piggyback on what everyone else has been saying too, that of course it's obviously building that safe space, but also too that sometimes I have seen with clients that sometimes that they're just not ready. It's not that they don't know that their family won't be supportive. They know that their family will be extremely supportive, but sometimes verbalizing it themselves, they're just not ready to be there yet. And so it is okay. I just say that as a clinician. I think it's okay to let kids flounder a little bit sometimes in figuring that out. It's okay for them to, I mean, Isabel's obviously closest in age to that age group, but sometimes it is okay, I'm sure, that just trying to figure it out without someone saying, hey, are you, is this where you're at? So.
Yeah, I definitely want to repeat what everyone else has said, that just making it clear that you are fine with them being who they're going to be is something that is vital. It's something that my parents did that made me a lot more comfortable than I would have been otherwise. Because there's a lot of horror stories that I've seen of people coming out and it going really badly. So just having that assurance that, you know, things will go well, or even if things aren't perfect, you can work through it. As well as repeating the point that people will come out in their own time. And just because they aren't comfortable talking to you about their gender struggles, if there are any, at a given time, that doesn't mean that they don't trust you. They're working through things. It's a lot to process, frankly.
Right. Well, thank you all so much. We have a couple more questions if y'all are still interested in answering some. Okay. I mean, we have until 8:30. So to Keith and Shelley, does your definition of what it means to be an ally or advocate change before and after Milo came out? I think we've talked a lot about this, but if you could just reiterate.
I would say that I didn't have a clear understanding of what an ally was at
Right.
first. Okay, I would definitely say that that wasn't something that I necessarily got my head around. Even with my college roommate is one of the best friends I have in my life. And even watching him go through it and, you know, meeting his child who changed names twice, you know, it was still something that I couldn't quite get around. But I think, you know, once you are firmly established as an ally, I think like in my school, they have, you know, there's like stickers on some classrooms that they'll have like a heart with like the rainbow colors in it. There's just different little things so people know that that's a safe area to be. And, you know, I went and I bought like, I think it was, I don't know, Michael's or somebody last year had like an ally shirt, or maybe it was Old Navy, I don't know, but it was an ally shirt. So I bought it. So, I mean, that makes it pretty easy, just wear the ally shirt. But we're just, you know, we're supportive. I'm supportive of Milo. I'm supportive of Milo's friends. You know, I don't necessarily understand everything, but that's okay. I know that my parents didn't 100% know me or understand me with all of my choices. So I'm fine with it. I mean, it's just, Milo's not me and I'm not my parents. So, but still saying, you know, I still love you. You're still okay with me. You're still in my book. You know, it's being the advocate. It's being the, you know, just being there in the corner, not allowing negative things to come in, or making your house like that sanctuary, that safe place where if they have experienced something negative, you know, either something they've seen on TV or overheard somebody say, you know, however it comes up, but having that place to go back and recharge your batteries, knowing that it's a safe environment.
Right. Okay, and then this is sort of the reverse, and I'm not sure if I understand this question, but I'm going to go for it anyway. This is, I think, a young person asking, how should I deal with a parent that thinks I'm LGBTQ due to being an atheist because of public school? So I think what that is kind of asking is, what about assumptions, and how should a young person deal with a parent who's making assumptions about their gender or their sexuality based on other parts of their identity? Any advice for a young person struggling with that?
I was actually reading the question a bit differently.
Okay.
The way that I was reading it was that the parent thinks that there's this cause and effect relationship between
right,
like, oh yes, this person is an atheist and they're LGBT, so the parent is thinking, oh yes, this is causing this.
Right. Okay.
That's the way that I was understanding it.
That makes more sense.
Although I may very well be wrong.
Well, what do you think of it either way?
I think that pointing out there are LGBTQ people of all faiths and creeds, frankly. There's plenty of people who are Christian or Jewish or Muslim or Buddhist or Hindu or any number of religions who are still LGBT. And the bit about it being caused by public school, there's plenty of people who go to public school who are of any number of religious backgrounds.
I mean, I agree with that. I actually have some close friends of mine who are part of the LGBTQ community, and they're pastors themselves. And, you know, part of their own faith is actually, you know, radical acceptance, depending upon like, you know, what religion you're in. And that's actually how they end up, you know, teaching and preaching and ministering, and various different backgrounds, you know, some that are Christian, some that are not. And, you know, religion, atheism, agnostic, you know, that doesn't affect gender whatsoever in your internal self. It's just more flavor into whoever you are.
Yeah, and I think I'd like to go back to something that Jameson said before about black and white and people of a certain age who have just certain mindsets about how some things are. And it's a very if-then relationship for many, many people. If you're this, then you must be this. Or if you don't accept this, then you must be this. And it's never that clear cut, ever. You know, there's a spectrum of, and then you fill in the blank with whatever you want to say. There's a spectrum, and the fluidity with gender fluidity, there's a spectrum there, how far you are one way or the other. Or there's a spectrum with how much you're into, and then again, fill in the blank with whatever it is. So I would say that the parents that this person's referring to have some pretty rigid mindsets. Yeah. I'm guessing, and they're very much an if-then person, and that was us. Well, that was me for sure. Okay, wow, that was me for sure. I'll throw myself under the bus. And I was, and you know, and Milo was afraid, you know, and Shelley touched on it. Milo was hospitalized twice, junior year and senior year. And, you know, she talked about looking backwards retrospectively, things became a little clearer. And, you know, one of the things I've learned about is, you know, people in the LGBT community have like an 8 times higher suicide rate. Well, no wonder. They're scared to death to tell the people that they should trust the most, or the people that they're worried of offending the most, the people that they're worried about won't accept them the most. And I refused to let my child believe that. I had to show my kid that I didn't care if it was Megan or Milo or another name that starts with M. I didn't care because it was, you know, and Milo definitely was never an if-then person. He never fit into any of those categories. So, you know, I would just say, it's going to be a learning curve, a steep learning curve. But there's plenty of resources out there, like PFLAG's been talked about before. That's stands for Parents and Families of Lesbians and Gays. They accept trans people too. They are a wealth of information. It's almost too much information when you're brand new because there's so much. Go ahead.
I was going to say 2 things. Being a teacher, in working with kids who are special ed, a lot of times it's education. So if you come across somebody that you're working or talking to that maybe doesn't know that atheism and LGBTQ doesn't go together, sometimes it's trying to educate the person you're talking to. And then, so educate yourself so that you can educate them. But also at the same time, some people you are not going to be able to convince.
That's true.
And
too.
at some point you just have to say, they have their beliefs and you have your beliefs, and it's okay to disagree. And it's not worth getting into World War III over. And
hopefully it can remain civil.
right.
It doesn't
And it's
get,
a parent, so it's,
hopefully it can get civil, but when, I guess if I want to touch on the atheist thing, if the parent must be strong religiously in whatever belief they have, then they're going to associate anything that is contrary to their beliefs and kind of lump those all together.
Right.
Because if I don't understand something, not religious, but on another topic, if I don't understand something or there's a new word I've heard and I'm like, Milo, come here, help me with this, and he's like, yeah, sure, no problem. He's the first person I go to, or one of the other kids. I'm like, come help me understand this. And he's very willing to sit down and educate me. So,
old people need help.
Yep. So, I mean, but really, educate yourself so that you can educate your parent if they're open to that.
And one little bit I kind of wanted to touch on that, kind of when you get to the spirituality with it. Even when we look at like Western religions like Christianity, the addition and the concept of like homosexuality, being gay even, is still a really relative addition to it. In fact, it was an edit. It was never originally cast down in the Bible. That was actually changed we're within a few generations.
1946 is when
I was gonna say, I wanted to say it was either 1938 or it was either after the first one or the second one. It was during the Red Scare, I was pretty sure. And so a lot of that, when you look back historically speaking, the Catholic Church used to perform same-sex unions. And back in the Middle Ages and all that, some were land deals, some were not. But a lot of this changed relatively recently. And so a lot of these ideas, when it comes down to saying, well, this is my faith, well, let's look at the Christian creation story just for a quick bit, real fast on that. You are literally, if you're looking at the whole Adam and Eve thing, which people always argue about that. Well, genetically speaking, God at this point in time took genetic male material and transitioned it to female. So in the actual Christian origin stories of gender, it's a story of transition right there, right in the beginning in Genesis. And so it's just that recently it has gotten changed because of whatever, unfortunately, political things that many of these people wanted. And but historically speaking, being negative to the LGBTQ community historically is actually relatively recent. It's just my 2 bits.
It's a profound 2 bits. Well said. Great point. So I just wanted to wrap up before I turn it over to Bertha for some finishing comments. And then I'm going to also try to put up the slide of resources that we had, although my PowerPoint failed last time. If you noticed that, I sort of fumbled and then just withdrew. But we'll try. There is a really nice comment I just want to share in closing. I know you all can see it, but this is from Mina. She says, this is not a question, just feedback. Thank you times a million to all the speakers. I'm overwhelmed by the pure beauty and sincerity of your words. What an honor to have this opportunity to listen to you all. I can't think of a more fulfilling way to have spent my evening. Thank you so very much for sharing your experiences, insight, and guidance. And I have to agree with you. Yes, so thank you all.
Thank you. Yeah, my heart.
Okay, and I'll turn it over to Bertha, and I will start up the slide if you don't mind.
I don't mind at all. So I just do want to remind again that there will be a survey at the end that you could fill out, and also reference to the slide that you will be sharing. I have to say that I thank you so very, very much for your honesty, for your insight, and for your personal stories that you have shared with us tonight. We all appreciate you being on this panel and the energy that you have shown when we were talking about creating this panel and into tonight is just, we're so very thankful for you. Thank you so much. That was well, anyway. So we hope also that for all of you listening tonight, that this event has informed and empowered you, and that it has made Aurora and surrounding communities a better place for our LGBTQ community, and as well as for all of us. Thank you very much, Aurora Public Library and Krista Danis, for hosting this evening's event and for being a great partner with the Aurora Human Relations Commission. As Ryan had mentioned earlier on, our future events in the Fairness and Equality for a Better Aurora series will be a presentation by the Legacy Project in June. And then during Hispanic Heritage Month in September, we hope to also, we will be doing another event and look for that as well. We hope that you can join us. So I know we could keep talking, but this event has to come to an end. And on behalf of all of us, we thank you to our panelists, to Krista again, Ryan, and Penelope. Thank you for joining us tonight. Have a great rest of your evening and stay well and safe.